The Lumi, a new currency from a small village in western Jamaica, could help countries in the Caribbean, Africa and the diaspora to realize their economic and sustainable development goals. The Lumi, which is pegged against solar energy and is endorsed by the African Kingdoms Federation and Eco6 countries, was launched recently, and there's now a major drive to roll out the currency out in Africa and digitally. The Federation has also announced a $6 trillion stimulus package for the African diaspora, Africa and kingdoms on the continent. Well, for more on the Lumi and the elimination of debt in Africa, we're now joined live via Zoom from Munich in Germany by the Prime Minister of the African Kingdoms Federation, Timothy E. McPherson. Chief Timothy, thanks very much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you kindly for having me on the show, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so you were instrumental in the creation and introduction of the Lumi digital currency in Accompong in western Jamaica. What inspired this initiative? It also had real notes in Jamaica.
Absolutely. From a perspective of inspiration, let me be candid about this from the very beginning. The Lumi has its roots in climate change. The region of the Caribbean is impacted by climate change more than any other region on Earth. And then after the Caribbean, of course, you have Africa and Latin America, in particular Brazil. And so the Lumi, when it was first put forth by the indigenous administration, was a no-nonsense solution to the very real problem of climate change.
All right, so last week we spoke to Queen Sheba, Her Imperial Majesty Queen Sheba III, and she told us that this Lumi is pegged against Africa's biggest resource, which is solar energy. And one might think, why not oil or gold or platinum, which is also in abundance on the continent?
Right. Well, indeed, this is a question of monetary policy. We obviously know that in your example, as it pertains to petroleum, that was how the Middle East and the Emirates achieved its wealth in the 20th century. However, we have taken a good lesson from not only our brothers in the Middle East, but also from the international community. And we recognize that in this 21st century, utilizing petroleum energy or nuclear energy or any non-sustainable source of energy to drive an economy is simply not sustainable and will accentuate the tragedy of climate change that we're currently dealing with. And so by looking at the greatest resource that we have in common between the Caribbean, between South America, and between the continent, we simply did our basic financial engineering and recognized that going forward into the future, there is an infinite supply of sun, and consequently utilizing modern technology such as liquid organic hydrogen containers, we are also able to capture the sun and transport it in the exact same way that oil and gas is transported. And consequently, we were able to build our financial model around solar energy. Not to say that we've excluded wind energy. And as you will appreciate, as it comes to the commodity of gold, of course, the Lumi is also interfaced with 0.2592 grams of gold. So we haven't excluded gold from the equation, but the primary underwriting is achieved within a 100 solar kilowatt structure per Lumi.
So when did the rollout of the Lumi commence, and what is the current digital currency's footprint in Africa and the diaspora at large across the world?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for that question, Peter. And let me just start off answering that question by saying the diaspora is extremely excited at the moment about engaging the continent as we approach January 1st of 2021. Now, the whole purpose of Eco6, being the economic community of the sixth region, is to bring economic support and kind of stabilize the continent's economy on the one hand, but also transform it into a global leadership position. And so in our, let me use that word, courting or our courtship with the continent, we recognized that the first footprint that we must bring to the continent is support during this current financial crisis and economic slowdown as a consequence of COVID-19. And the second footprint is, of course, eliminating the continent's debt. So as we approach 2021, in order for us to have a meaningful, symbiotic cooperation, it is crucial that Africa's debt be absolutely eliminated. And we've already made notice of this, as you recall from your conversation with Her Majesty last week. Oh. But if I can just go back a moment to that first footprint, in terms of addressing the issue of COVID-19 and the collapsing economies that we see both on the continent and throughout the diaspora as it relates to the global African family, we have issued a stimulus which was first distributed amongst members of the global African family on October 28th. And the second stimulus issuance was issued on November 28th. And that is a stimulus with a parity value of $100 per month. And within the context of our currency, that translates into 6.26 Lumi per month. And the stimulus will continue for the next 3 years, the next 36 months. And the logic of that is that we appreciate that the impact of COVID-19 will have a debilitary effect on the global economy for the next 3 to 5 years. And so by utilizing the stimulus, we will be able to drive economic, a basic framework of economic support across the continent and throughout the diaspora. And then, of course, by eliminating the debts, that creates an opportunity for the global African family and the continent proper to focus on this new era of industrialization and, of course, what we call the fourth industrial digital reset and revolution.
All right, we'll talk about the debt elimination just now, but I just want to focus a little bit more on the currency itself. So in Akampong, you rolled out physical notes and people could use these notes. The Bank of Jamaica didn't buy into it and some people were skeptical. And I just wonder, how are you going to convince the rest of the world if back home this currency wasn't embraced 100%?
Well, you know, let me say this equally candidly. The old order dies hard. And what I mean by that statement is this: climate change is a greater threat to the human family than any nuclear weapon or atomic bomb. And so on the one hand, you had, for instance, the Bank of Jamaica not being receptive to a central bank in Akampong, and they were thinking completely from a old framework as it relates to their own monetary policy, etc. But once you calculate the reality of climate change going forward, and the fact that we were ill prepared to deal with COVID-19, it means that we must take a proactive approach to dealing with this not local crisis, it is a global crisis, and it is very real. And so we don't actually have the luxury of humming and hawing about shall we embrace the Lumi or not. The international community is bogged down with fiat instruments, and with those instruments, they're driving their economies at levels that are completely irresponsible as it relates to our ecology. We see the desert in northern Africa expanding. Just 2 weeks ago in Jamaica, I witnessed the tragedy of one of our mountains in the eastern region completely collapsing. People lost their lives. We have our rivers running out of control. People are becoming homeless. Farmers are struggling, all as a consequence of climate change. And so in the same way that the international community has been more than aggressive towards dealing with COVID-19, I would say we have to up the ante 1,000-fold in our engagement to climate change, because as it begins to devastate our economy, then it will be too late to respond. So we must be proactive, and the Lumi has taken a leadership role. Indeed, the Maroons of Jamaica have taken a leadership role as an indigenous community to say that enough is enough. We must deal with this topic head on, and we don't have time to discuss old order frameworks. The new order is before us, and it is a new economic order. It is an order in which Africa must take a leadership role. We cannot passively sit back and let climate change devastate the continent. And it is an order in which the Caribbean must take a leadership role, because it is most devastated by climate change. And it is an order in which also South America and all of those Sunbelt regions that are sitting on rising waters must take a non-apologetic leadership role.
All right, just before we get into the discussion about the debt elimination, help us understand the difference between the Lumi and other cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, because there's a lot of debate about digital currencies and their safety, their value, their fluctuation. What's different about the Lumi?
Well, first and foremost, you made a comparison to Bitcoin, which would be the wrong comparison, because obviously Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency and the Lumi is issued by our central bank. And so what we recognize is that obviously sophisticated financial engineers have recognized for probably the last 2 decades that fiat currency has no future. And the advent of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and similar crypto instruments is basically an expression by the international community where they say that they no longer have trust in fiat currency. Now, fiat currency is an instrument that has no fundamental underlying value, or rather, no intrinsic value. It is simply listed as legal tender. So when the international community is rushing to create alternative instruments such as cryptocurrency, they are saying they no longer have confidence in that statement of legal tender. They want to see something substantive. They want to see something concrete. They want money to be money again. And so the Lumi comes forth completely different from cryptocurrencies insofar as, if you look at Bitcoin, nobody knows who has issued Bitcoin for that matter. The Lumi comes forth as a central bank issued non-fiat instrument that brings a tangible measure of value and speaks to the world of economics that the African family knows at its best, and that is true bartering value. By having 100 solar kilowatts and an interface of 0.2592 grams of gold, essentially the Lumi comes forth and says, we are money in its oldest definition, being a medium of exchange, a store of value, and a unit of account. And the international community understands that perfectly well. What the international community no longer understands, or at least no longer has an appetite for, is fiat monetary instruments. And so the entire international community, without exception, whether it be the US, whether it be Europe, whether it be China, the entire international community must come to a reconciliation with this fiat currency that they've been printing and devastating global economies as a consequence of it.
All right.
And the Lumi speaks to that reality as well.
All right, let's turn our attention now to the elimination of debt in Africa and applications for stimulus package. What is the link between the rollout of the Lumi and elimination of debt on the continent? How is that going to play out?
Well, let me answer that question with a small analogy. The diaspora has been off of the continent for some 400 years. And so as the AU has, all members of the AU have indeed invited the diaspora to participate in economic development for the continent. And indeed, they've adjusted the constitution of the African Union to recognize the diaspora as the sixth region. We come forth now looking at the African Continental Free Trade Area and Agenda 2063 as that body in which these 400 years come to an end and a new era begins. And in order for us to begin that new era, the debts must be eliminated. So we are courting our ancestral continental Africa, and we are what you would call very jealous courters. Indeed, the diaspora is very jealous. And so in our jealousy, we must eliminate that debt because we seek to establish the diaspora as Africa's #1 trading partner.
All right, so how do countries in Africa and in the diaspora get hold of or apply for this stimulus, and how will their creditors be paid? Have you started engaging perhaps with central bankers across the continent, and what are they saying?
Well, indeed, thank you very much. We've had extensive conversations with governors across the entire continent. We have a team that is busy 24 hours a day at the moment. And obviously, their first response is a little bit provocative because, indeed, they're not accustomed to the diaspora taking a leadership role and aggressively engaging the continent, saying we want to be the #1 partner for continental Africa. They're more accustomed to the diaspora as being somehow very much in the same position that the continent itself has been in. And so in those discussions, especially with the governors, they've expressed a great deal of enthusiasm as it relates to the Lumi model. And it speaks to a commodity-based framework which everyone is able to immediately understand. And of course, one of the biggest caveats by these central bankers is the debts that they have to foreign non-African powers. And consequently, that brings us back to the point of debt elimination. And so in order for us to have this meaningful, transformative family reunion between the diaspora and the continent, in which we take the continent into realms unknown for development, industrialization, and economic prosperity, those debts must be eliminated.
All right, so how are you going to...
I will hazard to say that I've had conversations with our counterparts also in Europe. And Europe is very, very ambitious as it relates to climate change. And consequently, the reception towards the Lumi has not been altogether controversial. They understand it, and they recognize how it can be beneficial in transforming both the continent's economy on the one hand and transforming Europe's economy on the other hand, by creating a relationship, particularly in the sphere of energy, in which while Africa is bringing electricity to the 650 million people that currently live without electricity, we can also be exporting electricity to Europe vis-a-vis liquid organic hydrogen.
Right.
And so we have an opportunity for a win-win situation here. And those European leaders who we've engaged with at least are very serious about this topic, and they understand the dynamics. Germany has certainly taken a leadership role, and we know that Denmark is also very gung-ho when it comes to these topics, as is Norway. And so consequently, we must not relent to deal with the challenge that is before us. We must tackle climate change spot on the head. And I'm very appreciative of Her Majesty, Queen Sheba III, who has recognized this and has also taken a leadership role in galvanizing the kings and the queens across the continent so that within those realms where we have direct access to our local African brothers and sisters on the ground, we are able to interface them and bring the support and the awareness. Because what is lacking at the moment is sufficient education and awareness to the challenges that we are being confronted with.
All right, I'm going to talk about that just now, but let's deal with a practical example. Zambia recently has struggled to pay its foreign debt and has defaulted on one of them, actually. Where do you come in there to help them deal with that debt question, which is happening right now? A lot of countries, because of COVID-19, poor management, have gotten themselves into serious problems, and a lot of their income is going to debt servicing. How do you help Zambia today?
Oh, please, Peter, I apologize. Let me illuminate you on this detail, as when we talk about Africa's debt elimination, it is not a suggestion or a proposition. It has been decreed, and it will be so. We have already given notice to creditors around the world. We have engaged the IMF, we have engaged the World Bank, we've also engaged the presidency of China and the president of the European Commission, with the point of addressing Africa's debt spot on. So whether it be Zambia, whether it be Haiti in the Caribbean, whether it be Botswana, wherever the debt is, that will and must be addressed. The economic community of the sixth region is consolidating and paying for Africa's debt.
So
those debtors,
but what does Zambia,
who are, for whatever reasons, reluctant to come to us for their payment, will be barred from receiving further compensation, because the payment is being offered. This isn't a philosophical desktop conversation.
All right,
the debt must be paid.
So let me be clear.
And we have opened our purses to ensure that it will be paid.
All right, so the money's there, $6 trillion at this stage.
So relating to Zambia, definitely, we are prepared to deal with Zambia's debt tonight, this second. I can take my checkbook out this moment and address that very issue.
And what does Zambia have to do in return? Is there anything that they need to bring to the table?
You know, you're not appreciating how much the diaspora is coming as suitors to the motherland. And so you should maybe think of this as a kind of marriage in which a husband is coming to his wife, or the bride is coming to her groom, rather. And so in this transformation, in which the diaspora becomes Africa's partner in an absolutely unbreakable way, the question isn't, how does Zambia address the debt? We're not coming as colonialists and as slave masters. We're coming as brothers and sisters, as distant cousins. And the objective is development, to protect ourselves in this era of global warming and climate change. And so the expectations, taking your example now of Zambia, is that Zambia will do everything necessary in the first instance to feed its people, to house its people, to build sustainable infrastructure, which we will finance and support in cooperation with them, and to ensure that this circumstance of being in foreign debt never, ever happens again.
All right, so
debt is foreign to the African family.
And this is a wonderful thing.
It did occur during these last 400 years as a consequence of colonialism, but it is foreign to us ultimately.
All right, so brothers and sisters in the diaspora are coming, and we reset the continent, as it were, clearing debt. We have had issues in how we manage our economies and run our countries across the continent. It's not, there was a reason why we got into debt, and there's a reason why perhaps we haven't been able to pay them. Sometimes it's poor management. How do we deal with that? Because it's one thing to get rid of the debt, but if you don't change your ways, you can quickly get back to where you were.
Well, indeed, I believe that this speaks to the new age and the new era that we're about to witness, and particularly as articulated by Her Imperial Majesty Queen Sheba and the vision for the African Kingdoms Federation, recognizing that part of the transformation is remembering who we are. So it's not simply about the president or a prime minister, but it's recognizing that there are also indigenous leaders and there's civil society. And we need to all work together in this transformation. It is a reset. We've seen the mistakes that we've made during these last 400 years. We're not naive, nor are we ignorant. And we have to be open and cordial and address those mistakes spot on. And as far as the errors that have been made, I always insist, there's a rhetoric that people often say to me. And that rhetoric is to say, oh, but Africa is so corrupt. The leaders are so corrupt. And I'm always reminded, if someone were bringing non-corrupt deals to Africa, then the leaders would also be non-corrupt. But because the deals that are brought to the continent are so intertwined with corruption, it forces the leaders to behave accordingly. And that we must address and we must change without any hesitation.
The current lenders are not going to give up their debt that easily. Yes, ideally, one would think they would want to get paid off, but actually, there is something in it for them when the continent remains beholden to them, and they might not want to cooperate. How do you overcome that hurdle?
I apologize, Peter. I didn't actually hear the first part of the question.
I was just saying that the lenders, the ones that own the debt at the moment of Africa and the African diaspora, that some of them may not want to let go of the debt, actually, that it serves them that Africa is in debt.
Right. Peter, please allow me to state this very clearly. We weren't offering an option. So in this new marriage between Africa and the diaspora, Africa as the world previously knew it is finished. It is a new a new body. It is a new bride and groom. And going forth, all things must be done in cooperation with the motherland and her children abroad. And so as it relates to the debt, of course, there will be lenders who don't want to let go of the strings that they are dangling, but we will cut those strings. That's not for negotiation.
How does the African Union play a role in this? Have you engaged with the political leaders that sit at
I
this
apologize,
gathering?
Peter. I'm not hearing you at all if you're speaking.
Okay, perhaps maybe let's make this the last question. The African Union, how are they playing a role in the rollout of this Lumi and changing Africa and resetting it?
Well, indeed, therein is the point. We recognize that the African Union is going through various hurdles and challenges. We have obviously written to President Ramaphosa and debriefed his office and his person directly as it relates to the payment of debt. And given his capacity and office within the African Union itself, we trust that he has taken the position of the diaspora into serious deliberation with all of the AU member states, and that every single leader from north, south, east, and west is aware of the transformation that's going on. I recognize that when, before they had dismissed their ambassador to Washington, it was indeed Ambassador Irikana Chiambora Cuello who had come to the Maroons of Accompong at my invitation, and she was the first one to recognize and designate the Maroon territories as the headquarters for the 6th region. So that was a decision taken from the African Union. And now as we go through this transition, preparing for January 1st and the great economic opportunities that are before us, all leaders must pull up their belts and get to work and make the Africa of the future that must be.
Chief Timothy, this sounds so exciting. We wish you and our brothers and sisters in the diaspora, as you come together with the motherland to make this happen, energize it, and reset the whole world and Africa take its place. Thank you so much indeed for talking to us, and I look forward to many more conversations as this rolls out in the coming months and years.
Indeed. Thank you for having me, Peter. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Good night. All right, that was the Prime Minister of the African Kingdoms Federation, Timothy E. McPherson, talking about this new digital currency called the Lumi. And it's been launched, it's been rolled out as we speak. $6 trillion worth of Lumi is already in the bag. And the purpose is to eliminate Africa's debt. And that can happen, as he said, literally overnight. They've got a checkbook. So perhaps this could be a new era, beginning of a new time for Africa as it engages with the world. All right, we'll keep a tab on that story for you.